coming into the classroom, I will be playing this video right here. It is just a video of a Native American powwow, kind of setting the cultural scene. And this is just going to be playing the entire time that students are coming into the classroom. It's about a 5-minute video. And in most schools that covers the passing period, plus a little bit extra. So it'll be good for the students as they're coming in to kind of gain their attention and get them ready for class. So as soon as the students are settled in, I'll pull the bell work question up on the board, which will be slide 2 here at the PowerPoint. The bell work question is, much of the early written history in Arkansas begins with the expedition of Hernando de Soto. However, Arkansas had been inhabited for thousands of years before this. In what ways are we able to study prehistoric people and their way of life? So I think this is a really good bell work question because the fact that it's open-ended, so it's really going to allow the students to, get those creative juices flowing. There's not really a right answer, and there is wrong answers, but there's not really just an absolutely wrong answer. You can always lead the student in the right direction, and so I really do like the open-ended bell work questions for that reason. So the title of today's lesson is The First People of Arkansas. The learning objectives we're going to cover today are we're going to describe the changes of Arkansas's first inhabitants' lifestyles over time from the Paleo-Indian period through the Mississippian period. We're also going to differentiate between the Paleo-Indian, the Archaic, the Woodland, and the Mississippian periods by answering Jeopardy-style questions. We have a few key terms we're going to discuss today, such as archaeology, which is the study of human history and prehistory through the excavation of sites, and the analysis of artifacts and other physical remains. We're also going to talk about radiocarbon dating, which is a method for determining the age of an object containing organic material by using the properties of radiocarbon, which is a radioactive isotope of carbon. We're also going to talk about pictographs and petroglyphs. These are both types of cave art, where a pictograph is made by using pigment of some sort and applying it to the rock using fingers or brushes. So this is such as a cave painting. A petroglyph is made by abrading, pecking, or incising the rock with another object such as a rock. Now this is more as an engraving into the wall of the cave. So the timeline that we're going to be discussing today, the Paleo-Indian period, which goes from about 12,000 to 8,000 years ago, the Archaic period, which goes from about 8,000 to 2,000 years ago, and the Woodland period, which goes from about 2,000 to 1,200 years ago. The Mississippian period is the final period we're going to talk about, which is the most recent, and this is going to go from 1,200 to 400 years ago. At this point in time, I'd ask some questions to the students to kind of go on previous knowledge that we've discussed. At least in the schools that I've been in, this type of lesson typically comes after the lesson with Hernando de Soto, which is discovering Arkansas. So I have 1541 in parentheses here. That is kind of to provide a hint for the question I would ask, such as, why do we stop at 400 years ago for the Mississippian period? Why is 1541 an important year? And that's going to get the students brains flowing. It's going to get them thinking, back to previous lessons and applying previous knowledge to the current lesson that we're on. So the first period we're going to be talking about today is the Paleo-Indian period. It begins roughly with the end of the Ice Age, and the people around this time were mainly nomadic. So they hunted large animals and followed them around to gather their food and their supplies. Some animals hunted were the saber-toothed tiger, the mastodon, the mammoth, and the bison. And as you can see down here, these are very large creatures. So we have the African savanna elephant compared to the woolly mammoth and the American mastodon, and you can tell they're all well over 6 feet tall. So these are humans hunting animals which are as big, if not larger, than they are. A very important site from the Paleo-Indian period is the Sloan site. If you look on the map here, it's going to be right here in the upper right-hand corner. And this is the oldest cemetery in North America, and it's located right here in Arkansas. Next is the Archaic period. So the development of this period occurred largely due to the climate change. Native plants were domesticated, and this was most likely due to the accident, which allowed hunter-gatherers to collect grains and nuts as well as continue hunting for their meat. Along with the Archaic period came more complex societies, which became more complex interactions. There weren't quite tribes yet, but the societies were based on who was more similar. Big cultures around this time were the Dalton culture, the Tom's Brook culture, and Poverty Point culture. Movement of materials is something that is very fascinating around this time. So Novaculite, which is mainly found in the Ozarks, made its way down into Arkansas, here in the River Valley actually. So there's two main theories for that. One of those theories is that gathering and moving, or they would gather the supplies of Novaculite and they would move back to their living quarters in the area in the mountains here in the River Valley, northwest Arkansas area. And the other theory is that were early trade networks where the people from around here would trade for the Novaculite and then bring it back down here. Poverty Point, as you can see, this is Poverty Point today. This is a markup of what Poverty Point looked like, and then this is a diagram of Poverty Point. So the Woodland period. Early groups here were bound by ritual, and they turned into large communities by the end of the period. Maize, which is similar to corn, became the primary crop for families. Pottery became very important, and burial mounds were a big thing here. Now the burial mounds were not quite like the burial mounds we'll see later on, but they were very pronounced in this period, and they were the first time that we started seeing these things. The main thing though with the Woodland period is the pottery. As you can see here, this is in the Arkansas Museum of History, and this is a pottery from the Woodland period. Some very cool tools from the period were the atlatl and the bow and arrow, which was created around the year 700. At this point, I would ask students if anyone knows what an atlatl is, and it's actually fascinating because I actually gained the inspiration for using the atlatl from a professor here at the University of Arkansas who showed us an atlatl in class. And when he asked if anyone of us knew what an atlatl was, most of us looked around like we have no clue what that is. But there was one student who raised their hand, and sure enough, they knew what the atlatl was. So I decided to test this out in a 7th grade class, and there was one student who knew what an atlatl was. So that was pretty cool, and it was a student who didn't really speak up much, didn't really answer too many questions. So that was a really cool moment to get him involved with with the lesson and the learning. So next, because most you got to prepare in case students don't know what an atlatl is a video on how to throw an atlatl, which is a pretty cool video. Can't pull it up on the slideshow, but I would show this here. It's pretty short. It's about 30 seconds to a minute long. And it's just a high energy video, and the kids love it. So the Mississippian period were ruled by hereditary leaders and chiefdoms. These were large-scale agricultural operations for corn, and they had stone hoes going year-round on these settlements. During this time period, domestication of crops from Mexico were becoming extremely important, such as squash, beans, and fishing was also developing around this time. Corn was still a staple food, but it lacked those essential nutrients, which is why squash, beans, and the fish were starting to become really popular. Since the mammoths, they are, by this point, they're long gone. So, that smaller food feeding larger populations of people, and so they were really dependent on agriculture. Long-distance trade was well established by this point in time, and copper was a big thing around the area. The Parkin site is another famous place in Arkansas, and it is probably the most famous Mississippian period landmark in Arkansas, and maybe in the entire Mississippian culture. So this is located on the St. Francis River, and it was on the province of Caskey, sorry. Does anyone know where Caskey is or what Caskey is, why it's important to us? And at this point, students should again refer back to Hernando Soto when he visited the province of Caskey. Here is something that is very interesting, and it is super local to me, and actually a place that I visited multiple times in high school. It is the Narrows, and what it is it's just on your way through Mountainburg, Arkansas, on Highway 348. It's just a little pullover that you would never even know is there, but just by some local knowledge, you find out it's there, and you kind of go and explore the area. And what it is it's these cave periods. It includes the pictographs and the petroglyphs. So it has the engravings, and we have the paintings there. And this is just a very fascinating site, and it's a little bit difficult to find, I won't lie, but I highly recommend, taking a look. It's been completely excavated at this point, but it's still just a really cool place to go to. So here is where we would play the Jeopardy style question and answer game. Again, it's something I can't pull up on the PowerPoint, but the students really love it. What I would do is I would separate boys versus girls, and we would have not buzzers, but students would have their Chromebooks, and we would choose one captain each. As soon as the boys or the girls, as soon as they come up with an answer, they buzz in, and it's just like Jeopardy from that point on, where they would either we kind of mix it up on this, so they would either answer as a question, or they would answer the question. So it's a little bit different than Jeopardy, but it's a really good review game, and it brings out the competition and gets everyone involved. So finally, to end the lesson, we're going to go back over the learning objectives. We're going to describe the changes of Arkansas's first inhabitants' lifestyles over the time from the Paleo-Indian period through the Mississippian period. So how did the lifestyles change here? And students would answer, from hunter-gatherers to large complex societies, dependency on crops compared to dependency on hunting, pottery, burial mounds, that sort of thing. The next thing we're going to review is, can we name any other tribe, or can we name any tribes that had a presence in Arkansas? So this is actually reaching for future knowledge, and we're trying to bridge to the next lesson here. So the next lesson is going to go over the specific tribes in Arkansas. So some students are going to be, aware of these from other classes. Some are not going to be as aware, but that's how we're going to kind of bridge that gap and get the students' brains flowing for the next lesson. And that's going to be the end of class, and thank you very much.